Sawadee Krap. Hello and welcome to another Victor Black Masterclass video. In today's video, we're going to be talking about one of my favorite subjects when it comes to training programming, and that is the subject of progressive overload. Now, unashamedly, some of the content in today's video is going to border on what I would call hello, Captain Obvious. There's a reason for that, though, and that is I want to go out of my way to make sure that the content that I create for Masterclass version 3.0 doesn't assume an understanding of basal knowledge for training practices. This is something that I accept. Historically, in the past, I've kind of taken the stand that says, look, by the time you should be interested in enhancement practices, you should understand all this stuff. You know, I accept that. I have historically taken that stance. I have deliberately and intentionally decided to revisit that, philosophy, that belief model, because I think that so many of the people that I see in the community don't understand the fundamentals of things. Just the other day, I was watching a podcast, Fuad Abiyad's podcast, who was a lovely guy, by the way, talking to Jordan Peters, and Fuad was expressing his, surprise, his shock, as it were, at the premise of micro loading. Here's a guy that's been on the Olympia stage and has never heard of micro loading. Okay, fair enough. Be it as it may, right? I have decided to start making some content that fills in the gaps, perhaps the fundamentals that historically I've just assumed people understood this stuff. So let's get started with today's video. Today, we are going to be talking about progressive overload, as I said. Now, this graphic here, there's a little story behind this for anyone that is unfamiliar with who Milo of Croton is. Milo of Croton was a 6th century BC, let's call him an athlete, a wrestler, adventurer, all-round good guy, who used to basically participate in what we would call feats of strength. One of his feats of strength was his capacity or ability to raise a bull on his back and walk around with it on his back. Now, how he reputedly trained for this, obviously this is hearsay, being the fact that he lived in the 6th century BC, was that he began with a calf when he was young on his back, and every day the calf got a little heavier, but so did he. So the reason I showed this graphic is just to point out that this idea that progressive overload is something of the modern era is a bit of a stretch. I will also show you with this book here. This is basically a book called The Science of Progressive Resistance Exercise. This was published in 1951. There is absolutely nothing new about progressive overload. It is a very well-established practice, both in terms of science. As I said, this is the workings of the medical community here, looking at rehabilitation of soldiers coming back from the Second World War, and through observation, anecdote within the bodybuilding strength training community. This is not news. This is not new. Okay, so we're going to be talking about a number of different progression models that I favor, that I use, that I prescript, that I program for clients. I guess the obvious question would be, so when would you make a recommendation for what model? Okay, it's a pretty obvious question to ask. So let me basically just explain two things. One, so let me answer the question, when would you prescribe which progression model? I would say when you are first starting out as an absolute beginner, the first dimension of progression is to exhibit better form. Just by exhibiting better form, you will be affecting a degree of progressive overload through that activity. Okay. Now, after that, the primary driver of hypertrophy for beginners, right, is increasing intensity through mechanical tension, either adding weight to the bar. At some point, you have to move away from mum's pink dumbbells to putting some weight on the bar, getting under the bar, okay? And I would recommend that people who are absolute beginners to this space, literally getting off the couch for the first time and stepping into the gym, firstly focus on getting better form, that in itself is a form of progressive overload. And then you slowly, gradually start putting weight on the bar. This is a very intuitive thing to do. This is something that people innately understand that we do, and they do very well at it. And in my opinion, people who are starting out tend to understand progressive overload better than intermediate advanced level trainers because they just do it intuitively. Now, of course, there comes a point in time whereby people struggle to put more and more and more and more weight on the bar. And so then it becomes a valid and viable discussion about increasing potentially reps or increasing sets as a means of progressive overload. And all of these dimensions are valid, in my opinion, at any point in your training career. But yes, I would agree that those that are first starting out are probably best served by better form and initially adding some weight to the bar, and then we tend to move to trying to squeeze out another rep. But eventually you get to the point where you kind of go, okay, really the only practical dimension I have left is adding volume, adding sets. Of course, some hybrid of all of these four models is what actually happens in real life, some sort of blending of these models in reality. So what we're going to be talking about here is progression. It fits into our hierarchy of what's important in terms of training principles. In the box I call invest your time here. So if we understand that adherence or turning up is not negotiable, volume, load, progression, and periodization is really where you should be spending your time. And of course, the great irony is so many guys, when they're starting out, spend their time in the upper levels of this hierarchy, which is they rabbit on about exercise selection and rest periods and really what you can only describe as minutiae, and they don't even have a progression or periodization model in place, and yet they're obsessed about exercise selection. And that does not mean that exercise selection does not play a role, that it does not have an impact, that it's not an important training principle. You just need to understand it's nowhere near as important as adherence or specificity of volume, load, or progression modeling in terms of creating an outcome. And what I mean by that is you are going to need a squat variant, for example. And I think it's fair to say that unless you have some architectural reason or some injury or something, you really need a squat variant. But there are at least half a dozen different squat variants, including high bar back squat, low bar back squat, sumo squat, front squat, hack squats. All are valid and viable, training inputs that are able to create, mechanical tension to the muscle fibers and then produce a hypertrophic stimulus. So which exercise selection, which variant of the squat you choose is far, 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 far less important, in my opinion, than the area as I said, we have a boxed off called invest your time here, and we will be talking about, as I said, progression today. So talked about the four different dimensions of progression, and today we're basically going to be talking about principles that absolutely apply to all of my training program, including the Black Death model. So if you're doing the Black Death model, understand that, yes, everything I'm saying here is right at the heart of why that program is so successful. Okay. Here, we are looking at a graphical representation of the increases in training volume load for hamstrings in the first image and for quads in the second image. Quads is the third image, over a 30-day time window using the Black Death training model. So you can see there's a very significant and quite aggressive increase in volume load over that 30-day period. You can see in the first image where it says hamstrings, the first dot is at 6,000 units. Let's just call it tonnage, 6,000 units of tonnage. And in very short order, we're pushing up to 10,000 units of tonnage in just a 30-day period. So progressive overload is at that very heart and the very soul of why Black Death is such a capable and powerful creator of hypertrophic outcomes. Today, in this video, we're going to be talking about one of the progression models that I recommend people follow. It's probably, at this point in my career, my favorite model. And I'll explain as we go through why that is. But in a nutshell, it's basically that I am, at my point, extremely injury adverse. I do not want to get injured. I feel like if I experienced a catastrophic injury at my age, I may never recover. I mean, it's true to say that as you get older, if you were to experience a catastrophic quad tear or something like this, you might well never squat again. You know what I mean? So I am very injury adverse, and so I prefer this model because, in my opinion, this model uh, is the best balance between effective outcome and being injury adverse. Okay, so let's just look at the model. The basic premise here is that we're going to be pyramiding the weight up over a number of sets. Right? Let's just hypothetically say we're talking about a high bar back squat here. So we have set 1, set 2, set 3, set 4, and set 5, where we incrementally and relentlessly add weight to the bar. The reason that I like this model is because I'm effectively got a warm up, for want of a better word, built into the exercise itself. I like to, to put the bar on my back and feel my weight out. And clearly I start with what would be a modest weight. In this particular case, we're talking about 60 kilograms, including the bar, Olympic bar. And I would basically try to perform, say, 15 to 20 repetitions with 1 to 2 repetitions in reserve. Now, do I consider this to be a hypertrophic stimulus? Well, yes, but it's not, in terms of, what we're going to be doing during this training session. It's not creating the lion's share of that stimulus, as it were. It's effectively, I don't like the term warm-up set because I don't think that it's contributing no, impact here. Some. But as we proceed through the sets, I think it's fair to say that we see a greater and greater contribution to hypertrophy, where realistically set 4 and set 5 are contributing significantly more to that training stimulus, to that hypertrophic stimulus, than set 1 and 2 are. And this is the premise of what they refer to as effective reps. The last 2 sets are contributing more than the first 2 sets. But the reason we do it in this model is because it lowers our risk of injury. Now, what I like to do then is push my way up to a top set, okay, and then lower the weight, back the weight off by about 20% from that top set, and perform 1 set all the way to positive contractual failure. In fact, I'm more than happy by lowering the weight to 20% to go beyond failure if I have the capacity to do that. And there are a number of ways in which you can do that, including 4 sets and getting a training partner to spot you beyond your capacity to do that work on that set yourself. So set 1, set 2, set 3, set 4, set 5, slowly building the weight up. Again, none of those sets are taken all the way to contractual failure. They are 1 to 2 repetitions in reserve, and then backing the weight down on the final set by about 20% and giving it one all-out set. Now, why do we back it down? Quite bluntly, because I believe that training to failure is a very, very effective way of, creating a mechanical tension signaling model for hypertrophic response. But it's also fair to say that if you do that under maximal loading, I think that you raise your risk of injury. So this is a model that I'm a big fan of. Okay, so then the premise is, would we come into the gym on week 2 and do exactly that same, training program on that day? Hell no is the answer. We're basically going to add 1 more set. Okay, so this time we've gone from 6 sets to 7 sets, really following the same model. We start at the same weight, but we add 1 more set as a top set, and we have a small incremental increase. And you can say in this case, it's really like 5 kilograms. Now, bear in mind, I am not saying you need to use these weights. These are created as a visual model for people to go, yes, okay, I can connect to that. How much weight on the bar is a consequence of you as a genetically unique individual under your unique set of circumstances. Week 3, same thing. 1 more set. Okay, so this progression model is principally based on adding 1 additional working set per week for this exercise. Okay, for this exercise. Okay, and then, as I said, to week 4, where we get to 9 sets. Now, a lot of people might look at 9 sets and go, that's way too much. But you have to appreciate that when we started on week 1, I don't think that, really many people would count set one as a hard working set. It's very debatable whether it is or it isn't. And this has always been the argument between the high volume training camps and the lower volume training camps. What counts as a set? And I don't want to get into that argument. I think it's egos clashing against egos. Who cares? Like at the end of the day, this could be, in one working set, this could be 4 working sets, could be 3 working sets. Who died and made you the set god, as it were? I look at this and I think anyone that's been under the bar can look at this and say, look, you know what? That's going to be a relatively challenging week, but it shouldn't really be what I would call brutal. It's a little harder. That's a little harder. That's really hard. Anyone that's ever, gotten under the bar, and hopefully by this point you've at least tried to do 10 sets of 10 at some point. It's quite a training session, to the point whereby I want people on week 5 to literally not go to the gym, to spend the time that they normally spend training sleeping. Okay. The purpose of the deload week is to wash off the fatigue that we have accumulated over that 4-week training block. Now, I am more than happy for anyone that says to me, look, I prefer to build up over 5 sets and then deload. Great. I prefer to build up over 6 sets and deload. Great. Myself, personally, I think 4 hard-working set weeks and then a deload in order is a very reasonable, practical time frame. And then, of course, for week 6, and this is the important thing, when we come back, we slide an incremental additional weight on the bar represented by the orange, fractional plate here, and we begin the whole process again, okay? So this is a process of basically saying we are, never going into the gym to lift the same amount of weight on the same bar for the same reps, for the same sets in 2 consecutive sessions. We push up, we push up, we push up in volume. We basically accumulate fatigue through that process that needs to be washed off with a deload week. Ideally, I don't even want you to train. Just spend those hours that you normally spend training sleeping. And then we continue on our journey of progressive overload by sliding an incremental fractional plate on the bar and continuing on our way. Now, how we do that is I have made content historically before about the use of fractional plates. If you are going up in increments of, in quarter of a plate, as they like to do in the bro language. So there are 20 kilo plates and, 10 kilo plates and 5 kilo plates. And as I referred to in the beginning of the video, Fawad was saying, look, if he couldn't go up by a quarter plate, he didn't go up, right? That was how his mindset when he was coming up. I would encourage everyone to understand that you don't just train the same weight week after week after week after week. Now, obviously, if you're a genetically gifted individual and you have doing a significant amount of growth promoters on the table, then anything is certainly possible. Yes, I agree. And you can't argue with outcomes. I agree with that. I think anyone that understands the rationale of this says, though, that you would be better served by small incremental increases week after week after week after week, rather than putting off the increase in weight because you can't get the big plate on the bar. Small incremental fractional plates are profoundly powerful tools in this regard. So in this video, this week's video, this is basically progression model 1, where we are effectively looking at raising the progression model by adding 1 additional working set per week. We begin the process with 6 sets. So 5 of those sets are 1 to 2 repetitions in reserve, with a final set as a back down set all the way to contractional failure. The next week, 1 more set. The next week, 1 more set. The next week, 1 more set. Hopefully by that point, you will have accumulated so much fatigue through this hard training that you will need to deload. And then we will recommence the journey again with an incremental increase of weight on the bar. So for those watching this, I do understand this is a little hello Captain Obvious. As I said, I apologize if you find this a little simplistic, but I think it's important that I make sure that these messages get to the community so that we are not making assumptions, that we are not forgetting about the fundamentals, as it were. Okay. So that's it for today's video. As always, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask in the comment section. I'll do my best to answer them. And I'll look forward to seeing you at the next Victor Black Master.